So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Hamashiach laid waste for many centuries. As we read it in Yeshayahu the prophet, it's extremely important understanding the 61st chapter, the coming of the divine spirit, and then also the layers related with the time of the restoration of tabernacling, and also the trade, extremely important in the 23rd chapter of Yeshayahu. And then during these last few days, we found lots of information very pertinent regarding then what Daniel, the prophet, has stated when he was recording the information from the divine. Then with Daniel, we find it then in the 11th chapter and 21st verse. We find then in Hebrew extremely important information that help us determining sections of this period of the restoration on the Gentile side. And then we find in this system there is a portion of it that was despised. Now, speaking from Daniel's viewpoint, what this despising means? Where did he get this information from? If you are a person related with finances of a country or kingdom, it's extremely important understanding the language in Hebrew, because the translations later on belongs to the world. It doesn't belong to the set apart. Now, some people, when they observe what's going on in our country, can simply determine that sections of these first 10 days of this government is not truly lining up with the reality of the world. Firstly, then, we find our country confronting China. Then we find evidences that then our government fighting against Mexico and obligating other countries to pay for something they got nothing to do with. It's already showing signs from Daniel the 11th chapter 21st verse that despises the system that is truly heading towards our way. Now then, there is this fence that's going to be built from Mexican border and US border. It's truly amazing the lack of prioritizing, because if we would gather the information we are receiving, and if you make a transfer of this information back during the time of the war, if you ask the regular person, would you want to build a fence in the border of a country during times of crisis? The country was going through a big, huge, extraneous period of shortage of money, shortage of materials. We had to deal with building thousands of ships. And now comes the new government and focuses on a fence, making borderline with other countries. Then a person do a bit of a research and finds out our ports, airports are seems badly lacking maintenance. The port of Idaho, also very important port for the production, and what they produce must be exported. And it's kind of a bit unique watching these first steps of this government, thinking of a huge big fence from both countries. It truly shows that there is prejudice, there is pointing of fingers, showing that the Mexican people are not worthy, and then mixed up with a bit of racism. So then, what is the standard amongst so many bad decisions? Because China already concluded they are not going to change their ways. I mean, they are the dominant power of the market. So when we make an evaluation of a very simple list of the number of countries and also the exports in TEUs, the equivalency of 20 size containers, you find some data from a couple of years ago plus that Shanghai is leading with a 35,268. Then comes Singapore, China again, then Hong Kong, China, then South Korea, China, and we are on the 18th with a scrawny 8.340. And watching these numbers and understandably reading the whole instructions from the Hebrew perspective, and then evaluating the so-named New Testament, and Revelation states very simply where the third portion of the ships of the earth are located at. Now then, our country has become racist again. Edgy and hard mouth. That's not the way the diplomatic world works. I mean, if we want a dictator, maybe we would find other kinds of ways of doing this. But then building a fence and then the taxpayers paying for it, whereas our ports, they are not updated. It's showing that this country has a grandeur for Aryan race, maybe, or something, or the white people, ruling over other people's color. If a person may mention this, it makes no sense. Of course, it depends in what part of the world a person was born. But then, rather than spending this money encouraging the investors, encouraging the people of the ports and maritime, and our ports can barely handle a post-Panamax ships, and now we are concerned with a fence. It doesn't make any sense. So then, the Port of Los Angeles, Newark, also the East Coast, a lot of them are complaining because they don't have the infrastructure. There are lots of merchants. Sometimes they dock the ship and they can't unload their cargo. United States using antiquated kind of equipment. Systems that they no longer work. Because the high-pace Asian market does not tolerate these kinds of technologies. They simply are not profitable. Now there are scores and scores of videos of old machines and pilers and container pickers, some very old machines and outdated systems. And it's kind of unique because the container was invented by an American, and then we find ourselves a few decades later we can barely deal with our own ports. Now, the government of our country now is hard-mouthing China that it has double and triple of our own exports. You can figure the numbers. In terms of containers, we are far behind. Now we are concerned with the fence, and then obligating other countries to pay for it, and then going on public and directly pointing the finger, oh, this country must pay for this, and that's kind of a bit unique. Power blinds people. Power is very dangerous. When a person is rich and lives in certain kinds of plateaus, afterwards, when going to public service, people begin to observe, and it's not very nice what comes out of it. So should a person be encouraging? I think the citizens should. But then there are priorities. A person would never spend so much money in a fence, and then the ports and the airports are outdated. No, take care of first the ports and airports, make sure then the rivers are dredged, make sure there is enough depth for the ships, make sure each state is obviously exporting properly through waterways. And now what does it do for farmers that they are producing, and then they watch on television building a fence? May be important for some people that are so miserable in terms of the supremacy that the country should be at. And supremacy, we simply don't have it. Now we want to force our supremacy. You can't. It goes so far and it becomes ridiculous. So then, the movement of containers in thousands of TEUs. China then comes first, then Singapore, and then China again, and then Hong Kong, and then China, South Korea, China, United Arabs, and then China again, Netherlands, Malaysia, Taiwan, China, Germany is 15, Belgium 16, and China again, and then comes Los Angeles. We are the 18th of the list. Now 8340, China has 35268, and that's 3 years ago. Now why we would want to pick a fight with Asia for? As any other country after the Great War, after 45, who wants to be against the United States at that time? It wasn't wise. So there are already signs of the despised system as day by day situations, circumstances are taking place. And it's going to get so bad that our ships must return to port. This is what Daniel is indicating very clearly. Now then, China has a point. In this section of the world, in the Asian market, and where the South China Sea is located at, that's kind of their area of dealing with the other nations. And when the other nations asked for help, then maybe we should go there and try to help. But what China has indicated that we are being a bad influence in the area. Now we have enough troubles in our own country. There are ships that are anchored awaiting for the unloading of their cargo. Thousands upon thousands of merchants are waiting for their merchandise. I mean, is there any other way we could spend our resources other than war and preparation for war? And we are no longer in those times of during the war or after. Our country is in a very precarious situation. But then we want to have the same supremacy as after the war. So then we should listen to these investors, freighters, the owners of ships, and start lining up with their wishes. Because the government is simply related with expenses. They only spend. They don't generate any money. In fact, the government is a dead weight. But after so many decades, the government has so inflated itself with importance, and now they can observe that they are dead weight. They don't produce. Now they are so inflated with self-importance, and they prefer a stupid defense rather than upgrading our ports. And then ceremonies and people coming around and cameras and pictures and signing executive orders and pieces of paper being photographed, and then our farmers having a rough time. We're going to get our produce out of the country. I think people should think more humbly and not so much, supremacy. And then, back to basics. If there is shortage of people at the border, hire more security people. few more helicopters, or or something that can get by until our ports and airports are upgraded. Maybe there is a tone of enslavement of the other peoples of the world. They maybe don't say these up front, but there are already some signs of lack of priority that we're leaning towards that way. So then the news truly gives us a few clues of the new system of China in the equipment being launched in space, and they already established links with the space and also the Earth, and the signal absolutely is 100% clean and nobody can go in there and tap into it, neither intercept or wiretap or crack, neither transmit. Now then, when a person is thinking from an Asian perspective, when the system is functional and working, you try to establish actions based from what is working the most. In this case is Asia. The market has many facets, but the bulk comes from Asia. So what are they doing that maybe we should be doing? What kind of a systems they are using that maybe we should be using? After the Great War, they start copying our ways, and certainly worked for them. Now comes a time that we should copy what they are doing. So as far as organizing the country, a very nice idea. I think it should. But the priorities are screwed up. A person cannot work with diplomacy by driving a tractor over them. And that's the way comes out from the president of our country. These other leaders, when they listen to these talks of our president, he's simply driving a tractor over them. He may not perceive, but the other countries are very sensitive when it comes to diplomacy and deals and other types of international situations. If China and the Asian market stay, United States is very intrusive in their area, maybe we should be concerned of doing other ways. Because the main bulk of the trade of the world comes from this region. Because if we don't do this, then the Asians are going to kick us out of there. There is so much that the Asian market can put up with. They already have technology. They already have the raw materials. They have the manpower. They have the money. Now they're trying to build a fence to show what? That We are greater than the Mexicans, we are greater than the Africans, we are greater than, Tahiti, we are greater than other countries. And what kind of a supremacy are we showing with our infrastructure so badly maintained? So then, Daniel then states a few other layers related with this particular system, and it shows previously on the verse number 7 a very important word in Hebrew, netzer, and speaking of a Gentile level, and then indicating that the relationship of this system relating with military, related with trade, and because of this system involves the kingdom of the north and what was then the Soviet Union, then we find ourselves in a very intriguing predicament, because Cuba is working on a project named Dragon Mariel with benefits for Cuba. Now then, we understand that Dragon Mart was revoked. However, Cuba has a big upgraded port. Also, Brazil helped a lot with the port of Cuba. So there is then the Chinese system making important decisions regarding the Americas. And this information is readily available for any person that wants to read. That there are talks, there is information in articles. Because China has the objective of having a place in the Americas for the distribution of what they produce. So then, Daniel the prophet gives us some of these clues and layers so then we can read and understand. But thus far, the system is not truly showing a forward motion. Now, with the Mexican government greatly upset of our own president forcing them to pay for something they had got nothing to do with, now then you have Dragon Mart. Maybe the Mexican government, if they decided they could have China build Dragon Mart. So there are many kinds of intricacies related with it. And if this goes through either in Mexico or then in Cuba, products would be up to 5 times cheaper than buying in the United States. And not only this, can you imagine what would take place regarding then the power of the Soviets, that were Soviets in today's, Russia? So a lot of power blinds. Hitler, for instance, he was blind. He was wise until September of 1939. At least this is what the American newspaper and reporters said. So then, each of us as citizens, we should realize and prioritize. But in most countries, if you ask what is the most important situation in your country, obviously is improving the economy via trade. Then the situation with the fence, deal with it later. It's not important. So then, next time I'm going to evaluate more of these from the perspective of Revelation, because it shows many layers of the time of the trade of the end. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.